You ought to see logic magicians. We're so cool and pretty. It's so neat and awesome cool. It's awesome and logic magician.
How's it going, everyone? We are the Logic Magicians. My name is Jonathan,
And I'm Zach.
and today is going to be just a I don't know, somewhat different recording on a number of different levels. I am currently in my dining room. I also got a haircut and I shaved because I want to look more like Zach.
And
All
I'm
of
also
our
in a different room
yeah,
too. There's a blackboard or a whiteboard behind me.
all the metrics that we got on YouTube were indicating that I should look more like Zach, so I went with it.
Yeah, and I'm
And
actually growing my hair out now because it was saying I should look like Johnny. So
yeah.
that helps.
Also, my cat is in the area and is running around. So if you do hear any meows, that is neither Zach. Well, it could be Zach or me, but if it's happening off camera, it is my cat. So today we are going to be continuing our series on logical fallacies. We're actually concluding this part of this series on logical fallacies. We're going to be talking about the final broad category of fallacies of clarity. And this, beyond just the location and different appearance and everything, this is actually going to be a presentation that is primarily going to be carried by Zach.
What?
Because, yep, yeah,
Oh, dang
surprise.
it.
Because he's actually the one with the master's in communication, and a lot of the fallacies of clarity have to deal with some type of miscommunication. So he's going to be able to give us a lot deeper insight into some of these things, and even from what my understanding, touch on some communication theory, which is going to be awesome.
You are having way too much of a build-up right now. People are going to be so disappointed when they hear me talk.
So do I need to? Well, since we're going to be kind of reversing the rules, I need to come up with a magic trick. I
think so.
I can like. Oh man!
Don't ruin it. Don't do it yet. Save that for later.
Okay, I'll save it for later. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about fallacies of clarity. And we don't really have any subcategories for this one. It's kind of the smallest category I tend to go over in my classes, but there are a couple of actually three specific fallacies that we're going to go over that I think it's good to be aware of because they occur fairly regularly, and it's a good thing to be just aware of as you're consuming media, especially as we're going into an election season. I think a lot of these things we've been talking about have been very relevant, especially we're recording this the day after the first presidential debate. So there was definitely some clarity issues going on in that debate.
I don't know. I watched the whole thing, and I didn't find any logical fallacies or communication errors.
I actually
all above board.
I told students to because we just finished up fallacies in one of my classes, and I told students to make flashcards and use the debate as an opportunity to practice because there were many opportunities. But anyways, especially on this channel, and just personally, I like to focus on developing a self-awareness for people and for students who are maybe new to this content. And I think it's really, it's important. It's important. So we have three fallacies of clarity that we are going to be talking about. Three fallacies of clarity that we're going to be talking about. The first one that I want to present on, I guess, is the term for it is kind of misleading. It is something that we usually use in a different context, but it's called the accent fallacy. The accent fallacy. And this isn't one where you can't understand someone because of their regional accent. This actually, when we're talking about an accent, we're talking about emphasis type of an accent. It's like when we talk about an accent mark or something like that. That's what we're referring to when we say accent. And an accent fallacy, just a general definition of it is when you place emphasis on something that was not intended in the original message. So when you're placing emphasis on something that is not really intended to have emphasis. The example I will often give is Sally and Bob are acquaintances, and Bob has a crush on Sally. So Bob goes over to Sally one day and says, "Hey, would you like to go on a date tonight?" And Sally says, "No, not tonight." Bob then places an emphasis on the word tonight. So internally, he kind of repeats it to himself. And it's like, well, Sally said she won't go on a date tonight, so we're going on a date tomorrow night. So in this particular scenario, Sally wasn't necessarily placing any emphasis on the word tonight. There's not really any conclusions you can draw based on any emphasis given. And so this is what will often happen when a person puts kind of undue emphasis or non-explicit emphasis on something that someone else said. Yeah. And
That's
then, yeah. And then, the way to avoid this, and this is going to apply to a lot of the fallacies of clarity. And my ways to avoid are going to be fairly simple, but I think Zach's going to be able to give us a little bit more insight into some of the mechanics of things. But the way to avoid really most fallacies of clarity is to clarify, right? So with an accent fallacy, if you're wanting to find out if someone meant an emphasis, or if you can conclude something based on something they said, based on your own emphasis, it's always just a good idea to just clarify. And the scenario I gave, Bob could just ask Sally a clarifying question of like, okay, so if you're not free tonight, would you be free another night, or is this kind of a broader rejection? Although
that's how I approach all of my women friends. I'm married now, so I don't have to do that anymore.
But yeah, so again, just making sure you're clarifying that you aren't jumping to conclusions based on perceived emphasis or artificial emphasis. The second fallacy, and this is personally one of my favorite, at least just terms for a fallacy. I really like the word for this fallacy. I think it's fun to say, and that is equivocation. Now, an equivocation is when you use a word that has multiple meanings in a confusing manner. So it's when you use a word that has multiple meanings in a confusing manner. Oftentimes, puns will actually be equivocations.
Oh, I do those all the time. I'm like a
Yep.
wristwatch because I just do it all the time.
Right? Yeah.
No,
so
it's on the left because you don't want to scratch it on the right. Another pun. I'm sorry.
Oh man. So yeah. So anytime you're using a word that is very easy to misunderstand, that has multiple meanings, then you need to be very careful with how you're talking about it, because what happens is you're using a word that someone else can have a different idea about, and so you're talking about the same word, but you're not actually talking about the same thing that word represents. I think one of the most common examples of this, at least within the political realm, this is actually one I point out to my students, is the term gun control. This is a term that means something different for lots of different people. This has really no strict definition that everyone adheres to. So again, using Sally and Bob, they're my example people. So Sally, gun control, the term gun control simply means that she thinks people should enforce already established background check laws. So again, not add new background check laws, just making sure that there is enforcement on already established background check laws. Now, Bob, on the other hand, when he hears the term gun control, to him, what that term means is that the government is going to come into his home, will forcibly remove his legally purchased firearms, and destroy his property. Now, there's no, I'm not saying that either of these definitions is wrong or right. Words are kind of talked about, they're social constructs, they change. The various definitions, their gun control sometimes refers to background check laws. Gun control sometimes refers to more broad restrictions on firearms, things like that. So neither Bob nor Sally have a bad definition here. They're just not using the same definition. So when Sally says, I'm in favor of gun control, she thinks she's communicating that she just wants background checks to be enforced. But what does Bob hear?
You can't come in here and get on my guns because I'm going to shoot you. It's my God-given right in America. Something like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to give any background on where you're from.
I grew up in Kentucky, so I'm well versed in the Southern accent realm.
Yeah. So again, here we have an issue of miscommunication, and I wouldn't say that anyone's in the wrong here. There's just a misunderstanding that's happening based on not having definitions that are in alignment. Now, this can sometimes be used, again, maliciously. We've talked about this in several other videos where there's a difference between accidentally committing a logical fallacy, which lots of people do, and intentionally doing it to mislead someone. So there are times where, especially I found in like philosophical arguments, where you'll start out with one definition of a word that is kind of more generally agreed upon, and then people will slowly warp that definition to mean something that kind of agrees with their view, and now they're using the word, which is more generally agreed upon, in a very specific way that, because of how they've defined it, it now supports their argument.
I do that all the time. I'm like a worm. I take the definition, I just wriggle it till it makes what I say.
Yeah.
You think up is up? Let me talk to you.
So again, this is one where, if taken to like an extreme caution, where you're trying to define every single word, like, what does the word define mean? What does the word mean? What does mean? Like, if you're taking it to a extreme where you're questioning every single word, that's very non-pragmatic. That's not really practical. But it is important that, especially when we're talking about complex ideas, especially when we're talking about multi-layered topics, that we're clearly defining our vocabulary that we're going to be using, so that we're all actually talking about the same thing. Because again, just because we're using the same words, we're making the same sounds coming out of our mouth, doesn't mean that those sounds are actually referring to the same thing. And
point a tip for anybody who is debating: the person who defines the terms first usually wins. So if you're in a conversation with somebody and you want to get ahead of it in a collegiate or high school level debate, define your terms as early as possible. And if you disagree with the definition, then speak up as soon as that person says it. Otherwise, you're stuck with their definition of the terms.
Yes. Yep. I'm also a high school debate coach. We go to competitions, and that is absolutely true. Usually the first speaker gets to really frame the entire argument based on how they're defining things. And again, Zach and I competed in debate competitions in college, so he knows his stuff.
That's not true. You know that.
Well, in that case, you wing it well.
Thank you. That's my life motto.
And then the third and final one before Zach kind of takes over is what's called a distinction without a difference. A distinction without a difference. And this is, again, one that I think is often at the heart of a lot of humor. There's a really, I find that whenever I present this to students, there really is a lot of humor in this particular fallacy. And so again, I don't want to say that these things are never to be used. Like we talk about how in magic, you're deliberately using, red herrings, distractions. You're deliberately trying to short circuit a person's brain so that, for entertainment purposes. Same thing with humor, right? Obviously, equivocation is going to be happening in humor. We just talked about puns and how they are essentially just equivocations. Same thing with distinction without a difference. We're more wanting, or at least I can't really speak for Zach, but I want people to develop a self-awareness so that you're aware when someone is trying to manipulate you using these types, not for entertainment or enjoyment purposes, but for, more malicious purposes. And so a distinction without a difference is just very basically saying that two things are different when they really are not. In a previous video, we kind of talked about a false analogy, which is saying two things are similar when they really are not. This is kind of the inverse. It's when you're saying that two things are different when they really are not. So a couple of really quick examples saying, I didn't steal that, I just borrowed it forever without permission. Right? That's
what I did to your heart.
Indeed. Or, you know, I didn't eat the cake, I just tasted all of it. Right? That's the same thing. And so oftentimes, you know, and these are somewhat humorous examples, but oftentimes this can be used as a manner to really downplay oftentimes kind of the moral significance of an action by kind of rephrasing it using less, I guess, less damning words. And that can somewhat minimize people's reaction to a thing because you are using less charged language, right? So it's important that when someone is saying that two things are different, that you actually, you know, put in the effort to find out if they are actually different. Now, there are some cases where things are very similar. Oh, there's one of my cats. So there are some cases in which
Now, would oh, you go on.
You sure?
Yeah, I had a question and I think I lost it, but I think it'll come back pretty quick.
Okay. So sometimes there are things that are very similar but different in an important way. And so it may initially seem like it's a distinction without a difference, but the way to avoid kind of I guess a fake distinction without a difference is to kind of show what makes the two things different. So focus on the actual differences, because again, in the same kind of vein as the false analogy, where you're focusing on what actually makes things similar. Comparisons and contrasts are a great way to increase understanding on various things. So here, the important thing is that you're not trying to bypass a person's critical reasoning by making something seem like something it isn't. But again, this can be useful providing contrasting points. So again, just focus on what actually makes them different.
I remember now, but it has to do with the question of truth, because that distinction without difference implies that there is an objective truth to the things, and so that's why I kind of forgot it, because it's like we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, that is the next video that we're going to be doing.
Great.
So those are the three kind of fallacies of clarity that I teach my students, that I think it's not a bad idea to be aware of. This happens regularly. These are things that, especially again, I would really encourage people to take some of these fallacies and apply them to various political rhetoric that is happening right now, because there is a lot of equivocation happening. There's a lot of miscommunication happening because we're using different terms, or we're different definitions for terms. There's a lot of distinctions without differences happening, and I think especially within kind of the broader coverage of the presidency, there's also a lot of accent fallacies happening, where there's maybe no explicit emphasis given in a quote, and by focusing on a quote in a particular way, you can draw various conclusions. So
cool.
Yeah. So now do I do my magic trick?
Yes, now you do the magic trick.
As a transition here, I'm going to magically. Oh wait, I just like literally gave it away.
You're doing great.
Okay, I'm great. Trying to think. Is this one?
Hey.
That works.
Well done. Yeah. Well done. So
there's a reason you're the magician part of the show. Here, let me show you how I do this trick.
And don't forget to have it angled backwards like this too.
Yes. So to make sure that it looks double jointed.
Yeah.
Woo! There we
Righto. So I'm going to talk about a couple different communication theories and the fallacies of clarity. And if I mess up and ramble or say something incorrectly, you're going to have to forgive me because, unlike Johnny, I'm not a professional teacher. I just do this for fun. So that's why I'm much more amusing than Johnny. Hey.
It's true.
But no, so I've just a bit of background. I've got my master's degree in communication, and one of the major points of communication is that we study communication theories, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of communication theories, because the goal of a theory is simply to explain a phenomenon in a different way, in a way that makes sense. So any way that you can explain a phenomenon is a theory. And so within communication, there's lots of different ways of explaining the same thing. But the most basic way, I'm going to go over just two, I think. I'll go over one, and if we have time afterwards, I'll apply one of my favorite theories to it. But for now, we'll just go over the SMCR theory, the sender message channel receiver theory. And this is the most basic of the communication theories. This is what you'll learn in your communication 101 or even before that in high school. And it is the idea that there's, in a communication realm, there's a sender of the message, there's the message itself, there's the channel in which that message is being conveyed. So that can be via the internet or in person or via radio or any other means of communication. And then there's the receiver of that communication. And
Can we also call
ahead.
the channel like the medium?
Yep.
Okay.
The medium.
Kind of like some Marshall McLuhan.
The message is the medium.
Yeah.
And then there's the receiver. And in a conversation, there's a feedback loop between the two. And so it's not just a one way, but the receiver would then become the sender of the message. And at any point in that communication, there is what's called noise, and that can be internal noise or external noise. Internal noise would be if Johnny's talking to me and I am thinking about potato salad and how lovely potato salad is, and my mind is consumed with that, that I'm not really registering what Johnny's saying. External noise would be if I'm making potato salad right here in front of him. That's a distraction that's getting in the way of that communication, that message that he's sending.
So would red herring fallacies essentially just be external noise?
Potentially, yeah. I don't want to say yes because I don't claim to understand all of red herrings, but potentially very much so.
So if I was like intentionally introducing external noise to our communication to kind of derail you, would that kind of fall into the distracting from the main argument, the main conversation?
I would say so. Where it would get confusing and where I would maybe argue, and it probably is not worth arguing about, is that maybe the red herring is part of the message, and so while you're conveying something, you're just conveying the wrong information. Gotcha. So that would be my thing, but I don't know.
I like it.
Hey, thanks. So we're gonna go through each of the fallacies that we went over within the context of that communication theory to look at how to reduce it or to prevent it or to stop it. And with clarity, surprisingly, it relies on feedback loops because that's how you clarify things. If the more times that the feedback loop is utilized, the better and well-defined the message being sent back and forth is. So with accent fallacies, that one comes down to a decoding of the receiver. So it's not the sender's fault, it's the receiver's fault. And that one can be difficult because the sender might not even be aware that the receiver is hearing something incorrectly.
Now, could you explain a little bit what encoding and decoding is?
I could, but I don't want to. um, encoding is the way that you portray the information. So it's if you're speaking, it's the words that you're using. If you're decoding the message, it's the way that you understand the message. So where the accent fallacy would come in is I'm decoding the words that Johnny has encoded incorrectly and placing emphasis on a spot where there's not emphasis. So
Nice.
I would say that that's probably caused by internal noise, which is causing you to hear something that isn't there because
Yep.
you have a want or a desire, or you're expecting something, and that want, desire, expectation is internal noise that is influencing the way that you're hearing what is being said. And so I would say that kind of like what this whole logic magician thing has been about is building self-awareness. So if you think that you're hearing something that might not be said, use a feedback loop just to clarify. So in the instance where Sally says, sorry, I'm busy tonight, was it Bob or Robert?
Bob.
Okay. Mr. Bob, he hears, I'm available tomorrow night. So the receiver, Bob, might reply, so you're available tomorrow night? And just by doing that, he's giving Sally a chance to clarify, no, this is a general rejection. I'm trying to be nice about it. Or actually, yeah, tomorrow night works way better for me. And fun, like, cultures have different levels of context. So communication levels of context. And this is like finer minutia points. So in some like here in England, they've got very high context. Like English speaking, they're the highest context, and should define context since that's probably a word that I'm using a lot right now. Context is how much you have to explicitly say something. So in America, there's not a whole lot of shared background, a lot of different cultures going, and as a result, in the US, you use a lot of explicit language of, are you available tonight? No, I'm not available tonight. And that's okay. It's not considered rude or anything. But if I were saying, if Johnny asked me, are you available tonight? And I didn't want to hang out with Johnny, and I'm from a higher context culture, then I might say, oh, I'm not available tonight, sorry. And what I'm actually saying is, no, I just don't want to be rude about it. But if he's from a lower context culture, then he might hear, okay, then we should figure it out. So know your context, know your culture. That probably wasn't needed to be said, but it's
No, I think that,
interesting.
well, but again, like the context is what we use to decode, right?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
what. So if the fallacy is taking place when the receiver is decoding the information, then I would say context matters. Like it's like so that's awesome. So again, this is actually I've taught about these fallacies for a little bit now, a few years now, and I didn't actually necessarily make a distinction between where the fallacy was happening, whether it was on the receiver or the sender's side. So I'm loving this.
Hey, good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. Now we'll move on to equivocation, which is where there are multiple meanings. And I would say that equivocation is a form of noise that happens between the two. I don't know if that would be internal or external noise, because you could make an argument that their understanding of gun control, in that example that you used, you could say that their understanding of it is coming from an external perspective where they're reading and learning about it. And so if one guy reads all of the negative things of extreme gun control, and the other person reads reasonable gun control laws about just enforcing those, that you could say is external noise. No, not noise. What would that be? That's context again?
Yeah, I was gonna say, can I come back to the context? Maybe so. Again, my comm theory is honestly restricted to kind of undergrad mass communication theory class. So I wonder if it would be that the context influences the decoding process. And so the information you have and the definitions you have for gun control would determine your decoding process, maybe?
I would say that that's accurate. That doesn't throw up any red flags in my
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
So again, context would be important there. And again, in this model, with clarity, the sender message channel or medium receiver model, feedback loop is very important for for addressing these errors of clarity. So in equivocation, you just want to define what the sender is saying. So Johnny says he's for gun control. Rather than jumping to what I think he means, you don't assume, you just say, now by gun control, do you mean the government coming in, forcing down the door, and forcibly removing all of my guns? And that gives him an opportunity to either confirm or deny what is being said. And you're essentially just defining terms and reducing noise both externally and internally, so you're working from the same level.
Nice. Okay, so sorry, my cat is actively freaking out at a door right now.
I do that all the time.
I know, right? So I wonder if we could make a distinction between kind of malicious equivocations and accidental equivocations based on where the fallacy is happening, if it's in the encoding or the decoding process. So if the sender is intentionally encoding it in a way that would introduce problems decoding it, I would kind of define that. I would kind of put that as the malicious one, and then if it's an issue of decoding where a person just misunderstands it, then that's the accidental type. Would that?
Yeah, I would say that that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are definitely ways to clarify what you're saying, simply by clarifying what you're saying. And if you're purposefully not clarifying on topics that are known to be a wide range of issues, then I would say that that would fall under. You could also say that that's just accidental, because if someone is unaware that, I mean, it's easy to get stuck in your realm of what something is and what something is not. So I don't know if it would be so easy to say, if they're aware that there are multiple ways of decoding this word, and you purposefully encode it that specific way, then yeah, that would be malicious.
Okay, awesome. Not as in like that's a good thing to do, as in like that's interesting.
Thank you.
I just wanted to. I wanted to clarify. Yeah, I want to clarify. My use of the word "awesome" there.
And then the last one, distinction without difference. If the outcome is the same, you want to focus on the outcome, and that it simply comes down to the way that the sender is encoding their message. If the receiver is focused on the outcome, then it avoids I don't know if it avoids it, but by focusing on the outcome, the receiver can no longer be distracted by what's going on. So the sender says, I didn't eat the cake, I tasted all of it. Then the receiver might reply, is there any left? And therefore there's no, it just further clarifies that.
So looking at the similarity of outcomes versus wording or definitions. Okay, nice.
That's the way that I would interpret and apply this communication theory to that clarity error. I don't know how long this has been going on.
Half an hour?
Should we half hour? Might be good to call it there, because the next one is my personal favorite, communication theory, coordinated management of meaning. And I could go into way too much detail Lindsay helped me to not go into as much detail, but I still might accidentally run too long and speak for like 30 minutes to an hour on this one. Or we could go for it. And
well, how about we'll make this two-party. Clearly,
okay.
folks, we are super duper organized in our execution of this channel.
Yes.
No,
And
we're
again,
having.
this is my first time teaching, so I don't know what I'm going to say. How do you expect me to know what I'm going to say until I say it?
So yeah, we're having fun with the channel. We're having fun with the content, and we'll call this video there, and then we'll follow it up with a part 2 where we'll do a
Cool.
deeper dive into the fallacies of clarity to give people a little bit more insight into communication theory.
Cool.
And
So
Zach's particularly favored communication theory.
yeah, I'm excited for it. I found this theory. I'll go into it in the next video, but it spoke
Awesome.
to me. And
Good.
maybe as I explain it, you might think that's a stupid theory, and that's okay.
Well, hey, this is a great plug for the next video. So tune in next week, folks, because it'll be a good one.
Unlike this song, Logic Magicians.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye, everybody.